At any given time, we want to have a dialogue, an intelligent conversation, a study session, a debate about theology, history, politics, church history, world history. We could talk about secret societies and how they have infiltrated religion, organized religion, religious bodies from however far back you want to go. And what happens is at least when I found individuals who were learned, who had studied, regardless of what their discipline may have been, but can agree on truth. And we speak with one another, cross reference ideas and information in an effort to arrive at truth. That's one thing. And it's not about winning the debate or anything like that. But if you're really a truth seeker, and when you find the truth, you're able to gravitate towards the truth, then that's one thing. But a lot of us, we're not capable of doing that. We are dealing with what they call or label the law of inertia. What's in place remains in place. Or better yet, an object in motion will remain in motion, and an object that's at rest will remain at rest. What's in place will remain in place, right, wrong, or indifferent, unless there is some type of outside influence or outside phenomenon that shifts that paradigm. Otherwise, it just keeps going on as it has been. I had on my show, on my radio talk show, Dr. Joy DeGruy, who has been the proponent of multi-generational traumas. And she coined a phrase that describes this phenomenon as post-traumatic slavery syndrome. And the whole notion of multi-generational trauma. I'll say it again, many generations of trauma, of which religion was a part of that, especially for the African American people. Now think for a minute. For the slave or the descendants of slaves to read was a capital crime, and they were killed for that. And they were killed and beaten and treated very, very harshly for reading. So many of our ancestry were illiterate to the English language, or any language for that matter, when we're not dealing with like the early slaves who came from another country who may have been literate in a different language, but again, according to the people, the powers that be, everyone was ignorant savages that came over, which is not true. It's a myth. But we do know historically, and we don't have to look far back, that, our ancestry, going back a little ways, were basically illiterate. And they had, even when the time that they got the permission to read, there weren't a whole lot of books available for them to read, even though they couldn't read. And if they couldn't read, then therefore they could not understand. And they were teaching. So how can one teach without an understanding? This is the early history of the church in America. Okay, did they have qualified teachers? Did they have literate teachers that really understood? Did they have were they firmly grounded? But what it is now, we're not dealing with the reading and writing of biblical passages. We have the preacher up front who's actually, in many instances in this recording, was perpetrating like he could read. And church doctrines were formed and so on and so forth. He may have been learning to read or whatever. And the early pastors at that time, they were under extreme pressure in regards to what they could say and what they couldn't say, or even if they could read, under fear of death. And this was passed down from generations to generation as, we grew and came out of, chattel slavery into peonage, into, Jim Crow. Jim Crow preachers, separate but definitely not equal. And there's many of those generational teachings that have been passed down from an illiterate people. And it has been utilized to indoctrinate, implant that on the following generation. But then it gets to a point where you may find one who goes out and, they're a truth seeker, such as myself, or they've been exposed to something other than what our ancestry has been taught. And it makes a whole lot of sense. And you just recognize the truth when you see it. I'm come from the old school raising. I never told my mother no once, until such time as I reverted back to Islam and she tried to tell me to leave Islam, which she has been trying to tell me ever since. And that day was the first time that I told her no. And I've been telling her no for the last 15 years. And I will continue to tell her no. Anything other than that, if she tells me to do it, it can be done. But I am not here on this planet to worship anything other than Allah. And it doesn't matter who or what tries to force me and manipulate me or oppress me to do that, to renounce my deen, because they're ignorant. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.